from St. Louis Public Radio. This is St. Louis on the Air.
It is a little daunting, especially making like an instrumental record. People listen to it a little differently. And the standard of playing in Irish music and folk music in general is very high. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of pressure there. You also don't want to think about that too much. You kind of have to do what you do. And part of doing this record was figuring out, this is how I want to approach it.
I'm Sarah Fensky. Kevin Buckley has been part of St. Louis's music scene for 2 decades, but he's generally worked with other musicians until now. The multi-instrumentalist is known for playing his Irish fiddle in combos around town, including a weekly gig at McGurk's, and his rock band, Grace Basement, has won plaudits for 15 years. Well, now he's on his own. His solo debut, Big Spring, drops next week and features this track, Sweeney's Wheel. And that is Sweeney's Wheel, part of Kevin Buckley's new album, Big Spring. And joining us today is Kevin Buckley. Kevin, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Sarah. It's great to be here.
So, Kevin, you've been a part of so many good groups and combos. What made you want to do this one by yourself?
I had to, I suppose. I've released several albums of my music, mainly in the form of my original project, Grace Basement, and my job really is really a folk musician, and I had yet to do that. Ian Walsh and I made a record together in 2011, and then I started recording all my other friends' records. They were making their records, and I was like, okay,
you just got busy helping them?
Well, that, and then just doing that, going through that process with them, I was like, okay, I've got to do this. It's going to be my turn to get in the hot seat.
And was the isolation of the pandemic, did that maybe help with that? You didn't have quite as many, times you had to just show up and play.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I had to. I mean, it was like, well, here we go.
And was that hard for you, or did it almost feel like a relief to have that space and time?
I suppose it was it's two things at the same time. It was as much as it was frustrating. I don't know if it would have happened the same way under different circumstances. Mm-hmm. So having that opportunity, being forced really to have that time. I think everybody probably had their own little thing during that time.
Their pandemic project.
Yeah, and I try not to let it define, the record, but it is something we all have in common. And we were all there. So I had a little extra time on my hands.
And I think the shocking part to me, as someone who's been familiar with your music for years, you've had many albums. I think Grace Basement has 4 at this point.
Yeah.
But you've never done one specifically devoted to showing off this thing that you're most famous for?
Yeah. I got away with it for so long, didn't I?
People just kept booking you without having that album there?
Yeah. It was having the record with Ian is nice. But yeah, I just, because it's hard work. A lot of it is just kind of just a little bit of laziness or just being intimidated by the process.
For sure.
Because it is a little daunting, especially making an instrumental record. People listen to it a little differently. So I think that, it's a little, in the standard of playing in Irish music and folk music in general is very high. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of pressure there to kind of, to compete with a standard, I suppose, but also do something that's like me.
Yeah.
Or, you also don't want to think about that too much. You kind of have to do what you do. and part of doing this record was figuring out, well, like, oh, this is how I want to approach it. Like, I don't think there's nothing virtuous. What's the word?
Virtuoso.
Yeah. That's kind of not how that's not how I approached it. I was like, I wanted to just make it kind of unique and something that was original. Like kind of a new take on it.
So the new take on it, this is actually, I want to play another song from Big Spring. This is Miss Bailey.
Captain Bold from Halifax, who dwelt in country quarters, seduced a maid who hung herself one morning in her garters. But his conscience smited him, he lost his stomach daily. Took to drinking ratafia, thought about Miss Bailey.
And that is Miss Bailey from the new album by Kevin Buckley. That album is called Big Spring. It gets released next week. Kevin is here with me today. So the reason I wanted to play this song, I imagine many of us are familiar with the version from the Kingston Trio, which is sprightly.
Yes, it is.
Despite these very dark lyrics, you sort of take the darkness in this song.
Yeah, and I've been singing that song for a while, like a more upbeat major key version for quite some time. And when I was working on this record, I think I had a conversation with I think Alan Murray, he's one of the players on it, and he's like, he gave me some sort of prompt. He's like, oh, you just do it slower or something. You know what I mean? Kind of like, and I was like, okay. And then immediately change it to a minor key. It does go a little major, but I think it suits the tone because it's super dark. Really dark story.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to the Kingston Trio version, it makes no sense that they're so cheerful about what happened to this unfortunate Miss Bailey.
They sure are cheerful. Yeah, and it's a spooky kind of it's spooky, and it has a sad ending too.
Yeah.
So that was it was fun to kind of turn that one around a little bit. Yeah.
So with these songs, are these generally songs you've been playing for years, and yet maybe arrangements that even big fans might not already know?
Yeah, I'd say so. It's a mix of there's some tunes on here that, just looking at this, there's some tunes on here that I've been playing since I was a little kid. Like some of the first pieces of music I ever, like Queen of the Rushes is a jig on there. It's one of the first tunes I learned. I with that particular track, as an example, I tuned all the instruments down, so it sounds a little different. And then there's Miss Bailey, was kind of a new thing, a new take on that.
Yeah.
So it's a mix of like old stuff, kind of reinventing it a little bit and bringing in new things. So.
And when you say you tuned all the instruments down, this is you playing all these instruments?
On some of the tracks.
Okay.
Now, there's about, I'd say, around 7 guest musicians throughout the album. But I was playing a lot of it, but also relying on some great musicians to play other stuff, which I wanted. And
I'm so curious about you as a multi-instrumentalist. I mean, how many different instruments are we hearing you play across the course of this album?
Well, I kind of stuck to fiddles and guitars, which is mainly what I play out, and then I did some bouzouki and some octave mandolin.
And sorry, what's a bouzouki?
A bouzouki is like a bass mandolin.
Okay.
It's a huge mandolin. It's a Greek instrument. Originally, and then it kind of got adopted into Irish folk music, like in the '60s, and it's kind of and it found its place and it stayed there. It's a very kind of important instrument in the music now.
So you say, "Oh, I'm only playing the strings." You're playing a lot of different strings.
A lot of strings.
Some cool strings.
Yeah. There's a bunch of them, bunch of strings.
So something else about this album. This is called Big Spring. I understand
Yes.
this takes its name from part of the Ozark National Scenic Riverways.
Well, yeah, Big Spring State Park. It's, I think, Van Buren County. Mm-hmm. It's on the Current River. It's just beautiful. And when I was kind of putting all this stuff together, I had my little bout with COVID
Oh, you actually had COVID.
Oh yeah, I had it.
We've all
pretty
had
early
it
on.
at this point.
I know, pretty early on, and I was stuck in the basement. I had I quarantined for my wife, just so she didn't get sick, thankfully.
Good quarantining.
Yeah, we accomplished that. But after living in a basement, and my studio's down there, my basement's awesome. But like after 2 weeks, I was like, get me out of here. So I went down to Big Spring, and then it was a beautiful experience. And I came back, and I had the idea to contact Dave Cinco to mix the record and finish it, and it just kind of there was kind of a theme that kind of all brought things together, which was very meaningful and productive as well.
And that theme, is the theme the emerging from the basement, or?
I suppose so. Yeah, you could say that.
Big Spring is not just the place name. Big Spring is here.
Yeah, I think it's hopeful, right? It sounds nice, and it was just
that's important.
Yeah. Something about it was just very appealing.
Yeah. But so when we heard Miss Bailey, that's more of a sad song. This is not a sad album. There's some great hope in this album.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's important to hit all those things. You know what I mean? That there's for an instrumental record, you want to cover a variety of moods. Mm-hmm. But there's 3 songs on there, and they're all pretty different. And each track all the tracks are quite, and intentionally, they're all quite different from each other. So, so they're all kind of like living in their own little world. And hopefully the common musicians and the mixing and all that stuff kind of makes it cohesive.
Brings it together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so you have had no shortage of gigs prior to releasing this album. Are you now going to do gigs in support of this album, or you're going to keep doing what you already have on your plate?
All the above. Tonight I'm playing at a Broadway oyster bar from 5 to 7.
Yes, you may promote that.
Yeah,
yes.
a little solo gig there. But we're having a big show right in your backyard here at the Sheldon on Tuesday, and that's going to have all the musicians from the record, including some guests, and we're gonna play the record and recreate all the cool arrangements that are happening in it, and we're gonna feature like best Irish musicians in town and some because there's also a lot of kind of non-Irish music on here. There's some swingy stuff, there's some old-timey stuff, and kind of more American influenced things. So that's kind of part of it too. It's all one big kind of soup.
That sounds huge. So for people who love Irish music, for people who love the strings, they're going to want to be at the Sheldon Concert Hall. That's Tuesday, February 22nd. That's basically the album release party.
That is the album release party. It's 2/22/22 on a Tuesday.
Boy, if people can't remember this, then they do not belong at this concert. Right. We also want to mention you can stream Big Spring on all major streaming platforms as of February 22nd. So if you can get to 2/22, you can hear this for yourself. You can do pre-orders on Kevin Buckley's Bandcamp page. We have a link at stlonair.show. Kevin Buckley, thank you so much for joining us today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
We're going to go out of the show with just a little more from this wonderful album. This is Marcel at Marcel. This episode was produced by Emily Woodbury with audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr. Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer. St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri, St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, honoring Arbor Day on April 26th, with an ongoing commitment to sustainable stewardship and conservation of Missouri's forests. ChooseWood.com.